Greetings, Internet viewers. It's your old pal Oxleymations again, welcoming you to part 3 of part 2 of my ventriloquist puppet collection. So we've been kind of I don't want to say rushing, but we've been kind of rushing through all these other puppets. So we're just going to keep on keeping on that track. Now, next to me here on the table are the remains, unfortunately, like the literal remains, of a couple of puppets that are also from the 1970s, I believe. Over here we have what's left of Stan Laurel and his good buddy Oliver Hardy. With these two, I purchased them from a person on Facebook Marketplace because that's where I usually get my puppets from. And, well, the pictures that the person used on the actual listing on Marketplace made it so these two didn't look like they were that bad. Like, you know, they could use a little sewing here and there, maybe some patches to fill in some missing fabric from the bodies, but they didn't look too terrible. Boy, was I wrong. Contained within these two Walmart bags, these two shopping bags, are their bodies. Like, you can probably just about make out a hand right there. This one is what's left of Oliver Hardy's, his carcass. There was even less of Laurel. Apparently a mouse or something, or some mice, got inside of Laurel and just like completely unstuffed him to use his cotton to make their bedding, or whatever the mouse did with it. And Oliver, he had a little bit of that going on. Well, actually, no, they didn't even touch Oliver, from what I understand of it, from what I could tell. Like, maybe a little bit, but he was mostly intact. To get a better visual representation, I did take pictures of them at the time, which, if you look at my Dummy Diaries, the promotional video I did for my Dummy Diaries series here, you can actually see a picture of Laurel as he was when I got him home. I just kind of stretched him out, and I'll link to that right here. But to give a better visual, here's Ollie's pants. You can tell because his name is emblazoned right there on the pocket. And that's the back of the pant leg, which should look more like this. And here's the straps. And that one's literally hanging on by a thread. And now here's Laurel's pants. Like, this has an entire big piece of fabric missing right there. And just the seat's blown out. Like, right here is supposed to be a seam that would hold it together. Just these unfortunate puppets were left in someone's attic or in their garage. And they did not fare well at all. They were left out there so long that the buttons that were used to hold their shirt collars closed and hold the clothes onto the puppets are rusted together so tight and so firmly that when I was trying to pry this open so I could actually, get it open, I started tearing the fabric, so I had to give up on that. And it's the same on this other shirt. Only with this one, I didn't try nearly as hard. Or actually, was this the one that... Okay, my apologies. That one was the worst one. This one, it was in just good enough shape that it's still a functional snap. But still. And don't worry, folks, I have actually cleaned and sanitized these things to the best of my ability. The outfits, at least, and the heads. That's Hardy's necktie that he would have been wearing. Yeah, these guys, it's a long form project right there. Not nearly as long form of a project as finding hands and feet for Dumbo the Clown and Archie, my buddy. And as you can tell by my demeanor, it's going to be a project putting those two together. Anyway, so now that I got them out of the way, let's move on to another puppet, shall we? Alright, next we have a puppet that most of y'all should be fairly familiar with, Willy Talk. This little fella was also made during the 1970s. Oh, I almost forgot to mention, with Laurel and Hardy, they were made by the EG company. And Willy here, he was made by the Horseman Doll Company. He's basically, as I got him in the mail, there was a person online when I was showing off some of the other ventriloquist puppets that I had purchased, who was like, I've got this Willy Talk puppet that like no one in my family wants, would you like him? And I was like, sure, I'll take him. And then the person, hopefully they don't see this video because I don't want them to think I'm ungrateful, but $25 to ship this thing. Honestly, I don't think the price should have been $25 for shipping, but you know, whatever. I paid it gladly, and it wasn't until later on that I was like, wait a minute, that's awfully expensive for such a little item. But whatever, it is what it is. He's, like I said, from the 1970s, and he very much has that 70s haircut going on. The hair parted right up along here, like the sideburns down to the sides like that. The back of the hair cut the way it is. He still works, and by he still works, I mean I actually had to put a spring in his head to make sure that, you know, it would actually work, like that. One of the interesting things when I got him is there was a rattle basically inside of his head. Like you'd go like this and it would be like chugga, 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 chugga. So when I took his head off so I could repair the mouth mechanism, there was a big chunk of leftover plastic from when this guy was first put together back at the Horseman Doll Company. So that was interesting. It looked almost like a Pringle. So yeah, that's a thing. And when it comes to most of these ventriloquist puppets in my collection, they're filled with some kind of cotton or polyfill. The Horseman Doll Company, they decided that they were going to sidestep all that and go the cheapest route, and they filled their dolls with foam. And I'm pretty sure if you actually go and look at the Dummy Diaries video where I repaired this guy, you can see him actually cough out foam, and I actually made that little bit of a bit within the video. So that's been Willy Talk. This is the third one that I've shown off on the channel. And so I'm going to stop, yapping about him, stop flapping my gums, and we'll move on to the next puppet in the collection. Next up in this little collection update, we have Tessy Talk from 1974. Now Tessy here, I'm sure a lot of you when you first saw this one pop on screen were like, hey, why got a doll on the screen? First of all, these are all ventriloquist dolls. And second of all, because Tessy here is an actual, somewhat functional ventriloquial figure. I can talk. If you notice, she's actually got the slotted jaw. She has a string coming out the back of her head, so she can go meow, 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 just like all the male ones. Now this is one that I picked up very recently. She is about a week or two into being in my collection, and she has some problems, like all of her brethren. Trying to pull up her dress a little bit, what's left of it, because at some point in her long life, someone tore off a chunk of her dress. And thankfully, the person who sold her to me still had that piece, so I'm going to be able to sew that back on. And when I get to actually doing the repair on her, which is thankfully not the mouth, because I found a couple of videos online right here on YouTube of people fixing her, and it's a bit of a process. It's a bit of an ordeal. But the most common issue with Tessy here is that when she breaks, there is a little piece of plastic that sticks off the back of the mouthpiece that has a little like lead weight attached on the end of it, and that is actually what makes her mouth close. That lead weight mechanism instead of like a rubber band or a spring, which is honestly really clever, considering that to get the head off, it's, like I said, a bit of an ordeal because she is a full-bodied plastic doll. And when the people doing the videos of repaired her, what they wound up doing was pulling up the hair on the back, just like folding it up, and literally cutting out the back of her head so that they could gain access to the little weight system in the back of her neck. As a matter of fact, you might just be able to see it right here in the back of her jaw. There's like a little dark gray thing right there. Anyway, if you saw that, that's the little lead weight that holds your mouth shut. Alright, now then. Also, for anyone who's curious, by technicality, he is in fact her brother. Tessy Talk, Willy Talk. Willy Talk, Tessy Talk. And then they have their older brother, Simon Says. But we'll get to him when I finally get one. Again. So, stay tuned. We're about to embark onto the next figure in the collection. Next on the list, we have Lester from 1973. I know technically Tessy and Lester are kind of switched around. She was from 74, he's from 73, but they're all from the 70s, so it still fits. So Lester here was made by the EG company, I believe. Let me just double check myself by checking the back of his neck where it should be stamped. Yep, the EG Doll Company. Now this is one of several models of Lester that were produced over the years. EG made him. The Juro Novelty Company had their own version back in the 60s, which is incredibly rare. So as much as I want to get one of him, if I wind up finding one, it's probably going to cost me an arm and a leg. But with Lester here, the original Juro version of him didn't look anything like the character, whereas the EG Company version of him, this guy does honestly have a much more striking resemblance to the Lester that Willy Tyler would use. And there's a funny story behind that, which if you've seen my Dummy Diaries video, you'd already know. But the head on Lester here is repurposed from Howdy Doody, of all characters. I guess just the way the mouth is shaped and like the overall shape of the face just resembled Lester so much they were like, let's go for it. Much in a similar fashion to what the Mego toy company did back in the 70s. Hold on just a moment, because I actually have an example for this. Because Mego was trying very hard to save money, like any good toy company would do at the time. And don't worry folks, I'm still right here. I'm probably still on camera while I'm saying that, but whatever. In the 70s, when they were making their original action figures, or in the 1970s when they were originally making action figures, that's the string of words I meant to say, they got the license to make Kiss action figures through a phenomenal fluke when they got the license to make figures based on Marvel Comics characters, because at the time Marvel was running a comic book about Kiss. So I know this is a big diversion from talking about the ventriloquist puppets, but it kind of fits tangentially. So the Paul Stanley Mego Kiss figure the head for this guy is literally the head from a character from a 1970s sitcom, I think it was, called The Captain and Tennille. So Paul Stanley here just has a repainted head of the captain from that series. So like I said, tangentially speaking, this is relevant because Paul here has a repurposed head sculpt and Lester here has a repurposed head sculpt. Also, when else am I going to get to talk about my Mego Kiss figures? Another interesting thing with Lester there is that when I got him, he had his original How to Be a Ventriloquist Flexi Disc vinyl record. So again, when am I going to get to talk about that? Other than the Dummy Diaries episode I did on Lester here, where I actually played this record in full. So if you want to know what the record was like, just hop on my channel and look up Dummy Diaries Lester, and you can find out for yourself. Okay, so I think that's going to about do it for this particular video. Tune in for the next one, where I'm going to show off another puppet from the 70s, and then we're going to roll right into the 1980s. So, stay tuned for that, y'all.